I'm Alan Landay. I'm the co-chair today. I'm from Rush University in Chicago, and it's a great pleasure today to introduce our session. This is a satellite organized by Towards the HIV Cure Industry Collaborative Group of the IAS Corporate Partnerships Program on today's title, Africa HIV Cure Research, Strengthening Industry Community Engagement in Community Research and Clinical Research. And so I think there's a great opportunity to hear a lot of interaction. We're a fairly small group, and I'll give you a few housekeeping points in a moment on how we'll take and interact with the audience. The satellite really aims to explore barriers and facilitators to communicate meaningful engagement and participation in industry-led HIV cure studies and to ensure acceptability, scalability, and cost-effectiveness as we move HIV cure into Africa. We'd also like to thank the organizers and in particular the IAS Corporate Partnership, and I'll show you now. If I could have the slides, how to get them up on they're up on the screen. And I'd like to particularly thank our corporate sponsorships and the IAS Corporate Partnerships for making this, really having this for us, and you can see those partnerships there. I also would like to welcome all the participants, both in person and online, and our speakers and panelists shown here, and you saw some of the panelists just before who are joining us virtually today. In terms of some of the housekeeping issues, please note that all virtual participants are muted, and please then, if you want to ask questions, put them in the Q&A section of the conference platform. And those of you here in the audience, you'll see that code there, the QR code. If you take a picture of that and enter in your questions through that portal, and then Dr. Van Lunzen and I will get those questions up on our iPad. I know this is great technology. It's well beyond my capabilities at my age. It's something my kids enjoy. I don't know how it works, but it's great to have this today. I'd like to now move on after having made these introductions. We have a packed agenda, and please be aware that I would like to have all the speakers stay on time. And now it's my great pleasure to hand this over to my co-chair, Jan Van Lunzen from ViiV Healthcare, to introduce the satellite and speak about why community engagement with industry is key to the success of HIV cure research. Jan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan, for that kind introduction. And welcome, everyone. My name is Jan Van Lunzen. I'm heading up the Translational Medical Research team at ViiV Healthcare. Before joining ViiV 7 years ago, I was treating HIV patients for almost 25 years. And it's certainly a great pleasure to have these esteemed colleagues here, both from industry and academia, on the panel, but also not to forget community representation as well. And that brings me right into actually introducing the topic. And let me start by explaining a little bit about what ICG of IAS is about. So there are a lot of acronyms, as you know, but ICG stands for Industry Collaboration Group in Cure. And that initial idea, which was actually or is still hosted by IAS, is to bring industry and primarily academia initially together to really facilitate crosstalk. We very early on realized that without community engagement, nothing will work. So we included community to be a major stakeholder in that conversation as well. And as we were moving along, we realized that where cure is still needed most is actually in sub-Saharan Africa and resource-limited settings. So we try to actually use this occasion here today to focus especially on community involvement in resource-limited settings and how a cure might look like in these regions of the world. And I think if we are contemplating a little bit about the successes of antiretroviral therapy, what we do have witnessed is almost a miracle. And we actually know that people can be treated very well. It is not only working very well in terms of preventing overt disease and disease progression, it is preventing transmission, as you know, but it is also quite well tolerated these days. So why do we care about still talking about a cure, and especially about a cure in Africa and other resource-limited settings? I think it is most obvious that it's all about accessibility and affordability, and that is, so to say, that despite having very successful treatments around the world, it is yet not still accessible to the same level at each and every place, especially in those regions where it is needed most. And therefore, it is that IAS and others have decided that we should focus on a cure specifically with the demands and the needs of resource-limited settings in mind. And I think this actually is ultimately why we are here. That is the goal of our discussion here today. We will have a number of short presentations, but we would like to enter in a dialogue. And that brings me to the second point why I think this is so much needed, because it is about equality. It is about also, fairness. Fairness in the sense that we will not have a cure or find a cure which is scalable, affordable, and available without involving community in resource-limited settings. Whatever we do, whatever fancy techniques, whatever gene therapy or whatsoever, we will develop in the North, will ultimately always have to be scalable and affordable in resource-limited settings. And most of the times, this is my personal perception, it has been that it was not a real dialogue. And it's still not a real dialogue if we are between North and South, if we are really honest. It is more like a monologue. It is giving and taking. It is about, donating and receiving. And that is what we have to stop. We have to enter a dialogue. We have to enter into a discussion which actually is balanced between both sides, where we have equal rights, equal voices, and where we listen to each other. And ultimately, me as a representative of a pharmaceutical company, we ultimately will always have to include whatever we do in this context to, again, listen to the community from resource-limited settings, and we have to measure whatever we are undertaking against this commitment. So with that, I would like now to hand over to our first presenter, who is actually Professor Sharon Lewin. You all know Sharon. She's a superb researcher. She's the president-elect of the IAS. She's also the chair of the Peter Doherty Institute in Melbourne, Australia. And more of that, she is also not only an excellent scientist, but also a very nice person and a long-standing personal friend, if I may say that. Sharon, please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Jan, and congratulations to Jan and Alan for their leadership in arranging this session. It's great to see so many people in the room, and also welcome to those of you that are online. I've been asked to talk to you about the IAS HIV cure strategy and also highlight the importance of doing cure research in Africa, which Jan's already given an excellent introduction to. These are my conflicts of interest. On AIDS Day, 1st of December 2021, the IAS published our global scientific strategy for an HIV cure. This is a third strategy that the IAS has led, and we've found it to be a very powerful tool for informing not just the science, but particularly informing funders on where they might want to prioritise their funding. The work was done by a very large group of people. It was co-chaired by Steve Deeks, a close friend and colleague from UCSF, and myself, as well as a steering committee that included Simon Collins, a well-known activist with HIV from the UK, and a very large pool of people from over 70 institutions and published in Nature Medicine. The process was a good one, even though it was slightly unbearable living in Australia on an online process from November 2020 to August 2021. Most of the calls were at 6 a.m. or at midnight, so that's why personally I love being here in person. But we had an online process to develop this. We formed 8 major working groups, and each of the leaders of the working group had their own team, and on every working group was a member of the community. We had a steering committee that generated that first draft and amongst the countless number of authors, and then went through a refinement of the strategy with an online stakeholder consultation. Over about 160 people were consulted, and then we had one-on-one interviews with experts and opinion leaders. So I'm really proud of what we could achieve given the circumstances, and the documents published and therefore available for you all to look at in the details. What do we focus on? We briefly summarised the advances in the last 5 years, and although I speak often about cure and often tell people we've got decades until we get a cure, the advances really have been quite significant on our understanding of the reservoir and our understanding of what works, what doesn't work, what looks good in animal models, and progression towards clinical trials. We've identified the remaining knowledge gaps and tried to list the priorities for the next 5 years. Of course, there are many other areas that people work on, but these were the priority areas. If I could just summarise the main areas we worked in, the first 3 were pretty much about understanding the HIV reservoir. Again, 40 years into the pandemic, it's incredible how much we don't understand of the biology of the HIV reservoir. If we don't understand the biology, we won't be able to develop the interventions to eliminate the reservoir. Measuring the reservoir, again, tremendous advances in the last few years on particularly single-cell analysis of reservoir cells, but how do we make those more accessible and more high throughput? And mechanisms of viral control, or essentially understanding what are the immunological aspects that are going to be critical to controlling or eliminating the HIV reservoir. The second group pretty much focused on interventions, and to put it really simply, interventions that target the virus. Many of you would have heard of latency reversal, something that hasn't worked to date but we still believe is important, or permanent silencing of the reservoir. When to be targeting the reservoir. There's really exciting data now that you can potentially have a bigger effect on the reservoir when we target it at the time of ART initiation. Targeting the immune system, understanding which components of the immune system are important and how to combine them in the intervention. And then a very exciting and rapidly changing area of cell and gene therapy, something we never really imagined was ever going to be possible for HIV, largely because of the issue of scalability. But from what we're seeing in other disciplines such as haematology, haemophilia, sickle cell disease, gene therapy might really be possible. And then underpinning this were some key principles that are relevant to all aspects of cure research, highlighting the importance of work in paediatric populations, and then the really complex social, behavioural and ethical aspects of HIV cure that we have to get right, and they will vary depending on where the research is being done. A year before the scientific strategy was released, the IAS had spent a long time developing a target product profile for an HIV cure, and that's incredibly important. So a TPP really should guide what we're doing and where we're going with our research. So in this publication on the target product profile for a cure, what we did, and people in industry will not be familiar with this, people in regulatory agencies such as the WHO will be familiar with it, many academics aren't, but it's the minimal and optimal criteria of what a cure might look like. These criteria we agreed should be universal and not classified according to high or low income setting. We want the same cure for everyone. And the TPP, most importantly, shouldn't inhibit innovation and discovery. We are still at that stage in cure research that we need that breakthrough science still, the innovation and discovery. We don't want to limit that, but we've got to think of what product we want, or most importantly, what product does the community want to see. and a real commitment that there must be global equity for successful implementation of a cure. So why should HIV cure research in Africa be prioritised? This is an incredibly well understood issue in this room, but quite simply the burden of disease. The people that will most likely need a cure are all in one region of the world. Of course, there are many others in high-income countries and other low- and middle-income countries, but the concentration of disease is in Africa. And there are some specific issues related to HIV cure research in Africa that need to be addressed. It's around implementation. What do people living in Africa want from a cure? May look very different to what they might want in Australia or in the US. What will it need to cost to make it implementable in Africa? What can be practically given in non-urban healthcare clinics? And what is the acceptability of some interventions? Gene therapy to us might sound like great science and exciting frontier, but gene therapy to many communities in Africa may mean a very different thing. And then there's a whole lot of scientific issues. What will HIV subtype have an impact? Most work on HIV cure has been on subtype B. Will host factors that are dominant in African populations play a role in some of the interventions we're thinking about? Will common co-infections or inflammation, which we know occurs more frequently in the African populations, have an impact particularly on immunotherapeutic intervention? So all of this needs to be addressed in our research and prioritised. We also know that new products take a very long time to get in the field. We're trying to do this better. We don't want to repeat what happened with oral ART being available in high-income countries in the mid-90s and taking over a decade to get to low-income settings. We certainly don't want to repeat that with injectable antivirals, and what brilliant news it was that we heard today, that yesterday, about access to injectable antiretrovirals. But that's why this discussion has to happen now. And several years ago, again through the IAS, we established something called the HIV Cure Africa Acceleration Project, or HCAP. And this is a platform to actually promote dialogue amongst all the key stakeholders that will be needed to accelerate the availability and delivery of an HIV cure. Now that is, of course, the scientists, it's, of course, the community, but it's also regulatory authorities, it's pharmaceutical industry or industry more broadly, it's international organisations, it's philanthropy, it's so many stakeholders that need to be thinking now about how we might implement a cure once available. Now, this project is currently undergoing some transformation. It was initially led by Mark Dybel, who I think many of you know in the room, previous head of PEPFAR and the Global Fund, and Uzukanji Sikazwe, or Suzu, who lives in Zambia, who's an outstanding leader in Africa. And together there's a real vision about how we're going to start that conversation with all of these stakeholders around implementation. So in conclusion, the scientific strategy maps out agreed scientific priorities for the next 5 years. Our work needs to be directed towards an agreed target product profile, which has now been defined for different components of cure strategies, and that target product profile needs to be the same for high and low income settings. And I think what we're going to hear about today is that strengthening HIV cure research really has to be a top priority because of need, the distinct characteristics of HIV in Africa, and to avoid any possible delays in implementation. So I'm really looking forward to the discussions this afternoon and from hearing from our other panellists. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sharon, for a really excellent talk. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, Nandi Nuthuli, who is the Regional Stakeholder Engagement Manager from AVAC, and talk to us about how to strengthen industry community engagement in clinical research based on lessons learned from HIV prevention trials. Nandi joins us online.
Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. I am Nandi Lutuli, and I am from AVAC, and I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. So I'm going to be talking to you today about how industry can strengthen community engagement in clinical research based on lessons learned in HIV prevention. trials. So the first lesson that's important for industry to be mindful of when doing community engagement is ensuring that the conduct of clinical research is guided by the good participatory practice guidelines. Just as other aspects of clinical trial conduct are informed by guidelines, the relationship between research entities and stakeholders is also informed by a set of guidelines known as the good participatory practice guidelines. So the GPP guidelines were developed in response to PrEP trial controversies in Cambodia and Cameroon in 2004 and 2005 to help prevent misunderstanding and miscommunication among research stakeholders. We now think of PrEP as this great and safe and effective product. In fact, we now have multiple PrEP options. But 18 years ago at the AIDS conference in 2004, the biggest controversy was the perceived unethical conduct of the oral PrEP trials in Cambodia and Cameroon by Gilead Sciences. During the conduct of these trials, community meetings were described as long and tended to cover the same issues with very little forward motion or change. Several participant concerns were raised repeatedly, especially by the Women's Network for Unity, but were never really addressed and questions often went unanswered. This created the impression that the conveners had no real intention of modifying or adjusting the trial protocol in response to concerns and feedback received. The results in the Cambodia PrEP trial this resulted in the Cambodia PrEP trial not being initiated in 2004, as well as discontinuation of the PrEP trials that already started in Cameroon and Nigeria. And this is what prompted the development of the GPP guidelines. The GPP guidelines were developed to facilitate the building of effective partnerships among all research stakeholders, set global standard practices for stakeholder engagement, and provide trial funders, sponsors, and implementers with systematic guidance on how to effectively engage with stakeholders in the design and conduct of biomedical HIV prevention trials. Out of this controversy grew a new way of thinking about research that focused and centered stakeholders in the planning, design, and conduct of HIV prevention trials, and the GPP guidelines have been adapted and are now applicable in broader disease areas, and they're also very pertinent and significant in HIV cure research. The second lesson is research literacy. GPP is not the same as GCP. GCP provides guidance to investigators regarding their responsibilities towards trial participants as well as data integrity. GPP offers guidance regarding the relationship between research teams, funders, sponsors, and all other stakeholders in biomedical HIV prevention research. It provides systematic guidance on how to engage with other stakeholders in order to shape the design and conduct of the research collectively. GPP requires research literacy to be a bidirectional process, a process where all stakeholders are building their research literacy together or collectively. Often we think of research literacy as information that researchers need to teach communities, civil society, and advocates about research. GPP, on the other hand, was founded on shared literacy because it's not just about communities needing to learn about the science, but it's also about the researchers, scientists, and trialists learning about communities. It's embedded in the process that all stakeholders, including research teams and industry, have a great deal to learn, and it's grounded in shared language and shared literacy. We need to ensure that when people come into conversations, whether they're statisticians, ethicists, advocates, or product developers, that everyone is coming with a shared language and a shared understanding of concepts so they can have robust, meaningful, and good participatory practice. We know there's a lot of complexity out there, and we all have to improve and increase our literacy, and we need to be doing this literacy together. The third lesson is meaningful community engagement. Community engagement has been a hallmark of HIV research. Community engagement is foundational to ensure clinical and implementation research is conducted ethically and reflects community needs, priorities, and interests as highlighted in the GPP guidelines. Product developers are increasingly committed to engaging with impacted communities throughout research to rollout. While an important step towards expanding GPP, this work deviates from traditional engagement mechanisms used in publicly and philanthropically funded clinical trials and requires innovative, co-created engagement strategies between advocates and product developers. Over the past few years, we've seen deliberate, ongoing, intensive engagement by industry as per the GPP guidelines around their key efficacy trials. And I'm now going to share some examples of how industry has meaningfully been engaging communities for these efficacy trials. The first example is of Janssen Pharmaceuticals, who committed to implementing GPP ahead of formulating plans for their global Ad26 vaccine program. The GPP guidelines emphasize the importance of stakeholder engagement early in the research process to ensure sustained and collaborative partnerships in the development of research agendas and protocols. And Janssen partnered with AVAC to host consultations with global advocates, which resulted in a customized GPP guideline for the Janssen research teams. Janssen's customized GPP guidelines help the teams navigate the challenging and sometimes contentious global landscape of HIV prevention research. The Janssen vaccine research team and program wanted to ensure that their stakeholder engagement program for the Ad26 vaccine trials was influenced and informed by communities where the trials were being conducted. They wanted to ensure that trial design and protocol development was informed by thorough engagement with global communities where the trials were being conducted. And with the guidance from AVAC and global advocates, Janssen ended up developing GPP considerations that guided them on how best to implement their trials and research. And there was commitment on these GPP considerations from all levels of Janssen, including Janssen leadership. And the commitment was to engage communities regarding trial design, conduct stakeholder engagement plans, and site selection, all of which were informed or are informed by the GPP framework. The second example focuses on Gilead's PURPOSE program, which is testing the 6-monthly injectable lenacapavir and daily oral FTAF pills, as well as Merck's Empower program that's testing the monthly oral islatravir pill. For these two efficacy trials, advocates engaged with Merck and Gilead in 25 consultations for the Empower and PURPOSE programs as part of their role on the global community advisory groups and as members of the Trial Design Academy. Global community advisory groups were developed as core to both the Empower and PURPOSE programs, and seasoned advocates provided key leadership and guidance in conceptualizing and establishing these groups, in developing the terms of references for these advisory mechanisms, and in facilitating and leading consultations. Africa's Trial Design Academy, AVAC's Trial Design Academy, which is comprised of global advocates that are engaged in key issues around next generation trial design. We engage extensively with each program and around next generation designs for both trials. Also working with advocates and implementing GPP in the Empower and PURPOSE programs, this established new models for engagement with pharmaceutical companies and furthered thinking around key challenges such as compensation to advisory groups and standard operating procedures for sponsor-level GPP implementation. Lastly, industry consultations with advocates and civil society led to key impacts on the trials, such as the inclusion of adolescent girls and that of pregnant and breastfeeding women in the PURPOSE 1 trial. The consultations also highlighted ethical concerns around the use of recency assays for placebo incidence estimation and maintaining blinding in the Empower trial at the time of the clinical hold. The last example that I'm going to share is that of ViiV's injectable CAB for PrEP rollout. Firstly, advocates and civil society demanded engagement with ViiV regarding their rollout plans for CAB for PrEP, which led to ViiV formally acknowledging various advisory mechanisms that are spearheaded by advocates and civil society as key partners to guide rollout plans for CAB for PrEP. As a result, ViiV has been actively engaging and working with advocates and civil society as they plan for the rollout of CAB for PrEP, which included ViiV asking advocates for input on their 2022 to 2024 community stakeholder engagement strategy for low and middle income countries. The fourth lesson is that research is a process. It's important to note that it's never about one trial, one community, or one issue. What happened with the PrEP trials in Cambodia affected research in Thailand, it affected research in Nigeria, and it also affected research in Peru. And particularly now, with the way that communications is spread, the fact that I'm able to present remotely in a conference that is happening in Montreal without living in South Africa shows that interconnectedness is real. We have to realize that that how communities interact with the science and research isn't about any one particular trial. It's about the research enterprise at large. One of the key lessons from industry community engagement is that it's not about one trial, it's not about one product, but it's about relationships between stakeholder groups. GPP is not about the community of practice, it's about stakeholder practices, because that includes industry, scientists, policymakers, and communities. We all have stakes in this, and it's about ongoing durable relationships that transcend one trial or one product. The fifth lesson is that you have to engage early enough and often enough. Thinking that engagement should only happen when a pharmaceutical company has a phase 3 trial or when sites are trying to recruit tens of thousands of people is too late. The investment in community engagement should be early and often, and because it's important to bring communities through the journey. Researchers and scientists often have this idea in research that if you build it or make it, people will come, or that people will use it. That if researchers, scientists, or pharmaceutical companies come up with a cure, that people are going to line up. So much of the cure research agenda is very early in development. And one of the lessons that I want to drive home is that if we only engage communities when we have a product that's ready for rollout, it will be too late. If industry or scientists cannot bring communities on this journey and help communities trust the research, trust the science, and trust industry as they're doing all of this research, and create that support for the entire process, communities may not be interested in using that product. And this is and will be true even if industry and scientists come up with a phenomenal gene therapy product in a decade that's going to help cure HIV. If you don't bring people along the process, you can develop a product, but if you can't explain it, make it accessible, affordable, and trusted, and create community support for it, communities may not come or use your product. This is why the Martin Delaney Collaboration Program is such an exciting program for cure research, because it fosters collaboration amongst academic, industry, government, and community partners to accelerate the pace of HIV cure, as well as community, patient, and stakeholder engagement towards an HIV cure. The initiative puts communities at a core pillar along with industry, and brings to life the importance of working with communities early and having them play an active role in building sustainable programs and partnerships across government and industry at the earliest phase of research. The collaboratives do not support clinical trials, so the community engagement pillar is about research literacy and trying to understand what communities want to push forward in the science. And AVAC is a community partner on 3 out of the 10 collaboratives. Also, the issue of post-trial access needs to be considered before the trial begins and should be clearly articulated during the trial design stages. And trial sponsors should provide ongoing provision of products that have demonstrated to be efficacious to all participants. Again, for oral PrEP trials that were conducted in the early 2000s, this was not the case. As research communities, we have to be ready and more prepared for access. The recent experience with HB 1083 and HB 1084 tells us that we need to be ready well in advance, because trials don't always end when they're supposed to. If they end early, the urgency is even greater, and we as the research community need to have plans not only for the open label access within a clinical trial or the post-access trial for participants, but we need to have more robust plans for what happens after the research has been conducted and how we actually move these products into programs. Oral PrEP taught us that we are too slow. The first results of oral PrEP were in 2010, and we still have not fully figured out PrEP access with oral PrEP. We need to shorten the time from the end of the trial to when products get to the people that need them the most. I'm really happy to be part of an advocacy movement that is working with ViiV and pushing ViiV to make injectable CAB for PrEP available in an accelerated fashion. African women advocates and civil society are using various channels and mechanisms to advocate for the choice agenda and equitable rollout and access of HIV prevention methods including the depriving vaginal ring for African women and girls. So it's imperative for industry to ensure that they work with communities during trial design, during the trial design stages and throughout the life cycle of the trial to think through these plans to prevent communities not having access to products once proven efficacious. So what should industry do to strengthen industry community engagement in clinical research? Well, HIV prevention and cure research are on a continuum. A person may acquire HIV again after receiving a cure. Cure trials will involve treatment interruptions, necessitating conversations around available prevention services. What we have learned from prevention is that people may not be ready for an intervention when the product is ready, or they may not have heard of it because their communities were left out of these conversations. It is important to conduct social and behavioral research to understand what communities want, need, and are ready for before going too far down the product development road. Stigma is also a barrier to accessing prevention and will be a barrier to cure as well. Community engagement
Nandi,
is
sorry, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but we really have to wrap it up to be fair to the other speakers. Could you please come to a close? Thank you.
Thank you. Community engagement is important to ensure communities are ready to participate in research, not just as participants, but as a voice in shaping the direction of science. And engaging communities early also means we are activating advocates to engage with transitions from bench to research study and research study to clinic. I think I'll end there for now, but I'd like to thank you all for listening to me and thank my colleagues at AVAC and our partners and funders. I'll hand it over to our co-chairs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nandi, and sorry for cutting you short. We will have some more time to discuss during the panel discussion. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker. We stay in South Africa. We will move over to a perspective from academia, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Thumbindungu, who is a leader at the Africa Health Research Institute in Durban, South Africa, who will present examples how communities are currently involved and contribute to HIV cure research. And he will also speak about current challenges, but also successes which have been made. And I think the technique is all set now. Tumbi, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Jan. And I'd like to thank the organizers for this really, I think, important initiative, and also support some of the opening remarks from Jan about the need for this dialogue and to, the continuation of this dialogue in order to accelerate HIV cure research, particularly given the complexity of achieving HIV cure, given the fact that we have very good treatment for HIV, and yet we need to also recognize that we need an HIV cure. So I'm going to talk about our work in South Africa and some of the work that we are doing in terms of community engagement, and these are my disclosures. First of all, just to say that in South Africa we have a very huge HIV burden, and this is data from a study that we did that was published last year showing the burden of HIV infection, and you can see that in this community in KwaZulu-Natal, HIV prevalence approaches about 40% in males and 62% in females in the age group of 25 to 44 years. So I think that, for me, there is no, it's obvious that we didn't need a cure, because this community, it means that the vast majority of people are going to need antiretroviral therapy for the rest of their lives. And whether that is sustainable or not is questionable. So, and also on the right-hand side, you can see that there is a lot of data that suggests that people who are living with HIV, even when they are on antiretroviral therapy, they have a lot of HIV/AIDS, HIV-related or ART-related comorbidities that range from cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, and so on, that are where incidence of this disease is much higher among HIV-positive individuals. And so, for a place like South Africa where we work, it's really no brain that we should do HIV cure research. So I'm going to talk about a study that we've been doing we call it the FRESH study, which stands for Females Rising Through Education, Support, and Health. And we started this study in young women because we knew that the incidence of HIV was very high in this particular group of women between the ages of 18 and 24 years old. So the idea was to try and identify women with acute HIV infection and study factors associated with HIV acquisition as well as disease progression. And as I mentioned, we targeted young women between the ages of 18 and 23 because we knew that HIV incidence was high and in this particular age group. And what we wanted to do was to combine basic science research with social support to empower and build life skills and job skills in order to see whether there are other social, because we know that there are other social factors that expose people to HIV. And so what we do is we recruit young women and we follow them over 9 months, and we over these 9 months we test them for HIV twice a week with a finger prick blood draw, and this is integrated with the social empowerment program. And the result is that we have really created both a research platform but also a social intervention program where we are able to assist the community with some of the needs that they have and some of the issues that really put people at high risk for HIV infection. So just to mention that the socioeconomic program, what we do is that we enroll groups of 25 women, 25 young women in each group each month. So there are about 40 women that attend our classes or used to attend our classes pre-pandemic. And as of March 2022, over 2,500 women have been recruited in 68 groups. And the impact in terms of the socioeconomic interventions that we have done is that we are very proud of the fact that we have been very successful. About 80% of the women have been placed in jobs within 1 year or started their own business or returned to school within 1 year of finishing the fresh program. We also provide HIV prevention services within this program, so we really work very closely with the community such that we are not just doing research, but also we are providing HIV prevention interventions, including PrEP, but also we do intensive HIV prevention counseling. We do STI testing and all HIV, a very comprehensive HIV prevention program. And a significant number of these women have started PrEP, even though in sub-Saharan Africa, in many other situations, not as many women actually do start PrEP. I should say that this is the number of women who start PrEP. This is not always sustainable, and actually even in our own setting, after they start PrEP, we do see a lot of dropout of women, so that over time they stop using PrEP. Despite all these interventions, we have been able to identify about 95 women who became infected while they were on the study, with a very high incidence that approaches 8%. And as we mentioned yesterday, Krista Dong mentioned, my colleague, the first 14 women will be identified with acute HIV infection who are not treated because we were following the then South African guidelines. But subsequently, we treat everyone, and 81% of the women were identified in FIBIC stage 1, and most of them are identified with acute HIV infection within the last 4 days of last test, HIV RNA negative test, and most of them start ART within 1 day. So very intensive kind of follow-up. And in terms of some of the scientific findings, is that I'm not going to go into all of this, except to say that we have learned a lot about acute HIV infection and the impact of early treatment, and including the fact that if you treat early in FIBIC stage 1, you blunt peak viremia, but also you preserve immune responses, including CD4 counts, but also other details in terms of the preservation of immune response. And we have understood a lot about virus diversification and ART, and we are using this knowledge that we have now gained to actually intervene directly in this particular cohort. So in partnership with Gilead, we have started a clinical trial, and the idea on this clinical trial is to see whether a combination of approaches that include early treatment, because we treat these women during acute HIV infection, whether this early intensified ART initiated during acute HIV infection, whether we can combine that with an immunomodulator, a toll like receptor agonist 7, and a combination of two broadly neutralizing antibodies to see whether we can achieve HIV remission. I would just like to say that this kind of work requires a lot of community engagement and involvement of communities, and we have been very careful not only to actually work with the communities that are participating in this research, but also there are research. When you talk about communities in low and middle income countries, I would also like to include their institutions, because there's a lot of need for us to build infrastructure and institutions if we expect that HIV cure research will happen. It's not going to happen in a vacuum. We need to build institutions. So most of this work has been done at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and the Africa Health Research Institute in Durban. We have worked with the communities, as I mentioned, the study participants, but also we have a community advisory board that works with us and advises us on all strategies for working with these communities. Most of the science actually that is coming out of this cohort, although we have collaborated with others, we have also made sure that we are empowering local scientists, especially young scientists. So it's the young scientists from the local area who are actually doing most of the research. They have published papers, and I think that they are coming up with impactful science. So I think this kind of comprehensive approach needs to be continued in order for this endeavor to be successful. So in conclusion, I think that strengthening HIV cure research in Africa is a top priority because of the need, the distinct characteristics of HIV in Africa, and also to reduce any possible delays in implementation. This will involve working with affected communities, scientists working in low and middle income countries, as well as HIV cure advocates across all strata of society, and there's a need for more inclusive and deliberate research and capacity building initiatives of this nature, and collaboration between academia, industry, as well as communities that are impacted by HIV. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tumbi, for a really excellent talk. I'd like to invite our next speaker to the podium, Dr. Devi Sengupta, who is Executive Director of Clinical Development of Gilead Sciences. She'll provide us now the industry perspective on the needs and approaches, how industry involves and works with communities. Devi?
Thank you very much, Alan. It's great to be here, and thanks for inviting me to speak on this important topic. This is my disclosure. So our overarching vision is to end the HIV epidemic for everyone, everywhere, not only through innovation, but also by advancing equitable care and leveraging multi-stakeholder collaborations. And we truly believe that finding an HIV cure is fundamental to achieving that vision. This will likely be an iterative process that progresses through stages. As Sharon said, we need that first scientific breakthrough to get to the first generation regimen. And while this may have limited eligibility and efficacy, ideally, it'll give us the scientific insight we need to get to a true game changer regimen, and one day our aspirational goal of a simple cure that's globally scalable. This evolution is going to take time and commitment and has to be done in strong partnership with the community. And that partnership needs to revolve around trust and collaboration to enable the innovation to reach our goal. So taking a step back, why do we still need a cure? The answer to that core question comes directly from the voices of the community, as beautifully illustrated here. And this has to be our guide as we work towards overcoming this incredible obstacle of reaching an HIV cure. So along the way, we really need to find also allies across sectors to support these efforts. These include internal partners within industry, cross-functional partners, leveraging academic expertise in this realm, aligning with regulatory partners around the world, and very importantly, working hand in hand with the community, activists, advocacy groups, global, local community advisory boards, and established organizations. So as we build this model of drug development driven by global community needs, we try to keep in mind these goals. Number one, affirm the priorities of the community early and throughout the research process. Make sure we engage communities most impacted by HIV to get their feedback on our cure research program. Build transparency and trust and ensure communication of results of the research as we go, and gain timely insights from the community and their feedback to improve our clinical programs. And finally, all of this has to be done through fostering an environment of dialogue and collaboration. So to that end, last year we established our Gilead HIV Cure Global Community Advisory Board. And our main mission is to meet at least quarterly to gain input on our overall program and trial-specific questions. And some examples of the topics that we've covered so far include our overall cure strategy, our draft target product profile to get community input on what that should really look like, therapeutics in development, early stage, including preclinical and early clinical modalities and looking also to the future, and finally, clinical trial design and conduct. And we are really fortunate to have assembled a wonderful group of experts and advocates from around the world, as shown here. So I'd just like to take a few minutes to share some of the early feedback that we've received already from our CAB on our CURE program. So some of the guiding principles are shown here, again, in making sure we continue to engage community with open bilateral communication, define and manage expectations around concepts such as functional cure, remission, eradication, truly create a sense of journey for participants and bring them along as we embark on this difficult challenge. Select sites, clinical trial sites with experience in recruiting and supporting diverse participants and strong community relationships. And some of the more specific feedback includes setting enrollment goals to improve inclusion as we move towards large trials, leveraging historical control data whenever possible, and innovative trial design to optimize risk and benefit for trial participants, expanding trials into low and middle income countries, making sure that PrEP is available for partners of participants in analytical treatment interruption trials, overall aiming to decrease the complexity of visits and procedures and minimizing the burden during analytical treatment interruptions through things like home viral load testing. So all of this input we really think is foundational as we try to develop these curative therapies, and we're aiming to incorporate this feedback, and we believe strongly that incorporating this feedback and gathering more as we go will increase the probability of success of all of our programs and the cure programs around the world. So Thumbi highlighted the interventional trial that just launched in South Africa in collaboration with Krista Dong and Thumbi, leveraging the FRESH cohort. And as Thumbi also highlighted, along the process of protocol development and trial setup, community input has been gathered through the CAB from the University of KwaZulu-Natal via regular meetings with investigators during development, review of the informed consent form, focus groups within FRESH, and finally, we're really excited about a social behavioral research study that I'll talk about next. So we're thrilled to be partners in this unique opportunity to translate an immunotherapy combination strategy in a historically really underrepresented group in cure research, but one with the greatest unmet need. So these early HIV cure trials, obviously the main goal is to test important scientific concepts. But equally important is to make sure we use the opportunity to gather feedback from the participants themselves on their experience in the trial. So Corinne Dubé, who's here in the audience today, and Krista have been working to set up a social behavioral research study that's running in parallel with the interventional trial, leveraging both qualitative in-depth interviews and quantitative surveys. And some of the topics that are being covered through this research include perceptions of the products and the procedures, social support and empowerment, perceptions of risks and benefits, the motivations behind enrolling in the trial, the decision-making behind that, the expectations of the participants, sexual risk behavioral assessment, considerations for disclosure and partner protection, and finally, mental health, self-esteem, resilience, and stigma. And we really look forward to seeing the results of this work. And we really believe that this type of gathering these types of data will improve our efforts and efforts for researchers around the world in trying to test interventions in a really participant-centered way in the future. So to conclude, community engagement. Why? Because science is really better when everybody has a seat at the table. We want to work with community closely to truly define the unmet need and what meaningful outcomes are for people living with HIV, design clinical trials to provide robust scientific answers while balancing participant risk and benefit, increase awareness and understanding of the current state of cure research and the progress among the broader community, enroll, retain, and support a broadly representative study population. And how can we go about, as industry leaders, how can we go about doing this? As Nandi beautifully also said, we also agree that early, often repeated, and committed engagement with global community advisors, as well as when appropriate, regional and site-specific input is going to be key. Incorporating social behavioral research, as I mentioned, engaging with well-established organizations, and also Nandi really wonderfully explained how we can leverage experiences, lessons learned, and relationships from other development programs such as prevention. So thank you very much for letting me share some of the ways that we're aiming to increase and strengthen industry and community relationships. We're really at the beginning of this process and looking forward to learning from and working with our community partners even more closely towards an HIV cure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Devi. And this concludes our presentation session, but we are now inviting the panelists, which are comprised of all those speakers which we have already heard about. But I would also like to come to stage now. Let me ask Marina Keskay, who is a professor of clinical investigation at the Rockefeller University, a very well-known scientist involved in very many of the broadly neutralizing antibody trials, to come up on stage, as well as Jeff Seyfried, who is Senior Director, Infectious Disease at Immunity Bio, and to come up on stage as well, please. And we do have then a couple of folks actually attending virtually. Not to forget, I see that Josephine Nabukenya, actually, who is a JUICE program coordinator at Makerere University in Uganda, is also here in person, so welcome. We do have a couple of folks joining virtually, as I said. First is Bonnie Howell, who is Associate Vice President Pharmacology and the Global HIV Cure Lead at Merck & Company. We have Suzu Sikazwe, who is the CEO of the Center for Infectious Disease Research in Zambia. Welcome, Suzu. And last but not least, we also have Tim Henrik, who is Associate Professor of Medicine at the UCSF Center in San Francisco. And welcome to all of you to join our panel discussion, which will be moderated by Alan and I. So let us get started, and I would like to perhaps start with the youth coordinator. So could I ask you to comment on, from your perspective, we have heard now, senior academics, we have heard a number of folks from industry introducing their ideas and their perspectives, but what is really needed, and maybe you want to give us a focus on specific needs for industry, what they should do or what they should better, in the near future from your perspective. Can I turn it over to you, please?
Thank you so much. Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Josephine Nabukenya from Uganda, and I think one of the key things, as the previous speaker said, is involvement of the people from the time a product is being developed or from the time research is being designed. I think I spent so many years without hearing so much about HIV cure. And it was until I attended a fellowship in Botswana, that was around either 17 or 18. That's when I started hearing about HIV cure. But a lot had been done, a lot is being done even up to now, but it is just within us. The young person down there in the rural village does not know that actually a product is being developed for us. They don't have that hope, not to create false hope, but for them to understand that, something is being done, and let me hold on with this medication, let me hold on with the pill fatigue and the pill burden and everything, because something is being done. So I think one key thing is involvement of other people in the entire process, and the people to be involved should be very key that they will link the scientists to the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as Alan is getting prepared for the next question, I should really remind also everyone who's attending virtually to put in your questions into the chat. And I see that there are some people lining up with questions in the room already. But Alan, I'll turn it over to you to please.
I'll expand a little bit. As we heard from Devi, we also have some other industry colleagues here today, which we'd like to hear from. So maybe Bonnie Howe online, and then Jeff Safrit, so we can hear a little bit more as we're looking at how we've heard from the community very eloquently. How can industry really help work with the community in Africa in cure research? Bonnie and then Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here today. So, just a few comments about why we think it's important that we're having this satellite around HIV cure research and the focus on Africa. We've heard already about the global disease around HIV, but the biggest need and the greatest burden being in low and moderate income countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And so as cure strategies are developed, we've also heard Nandi and Demi talk specifically about several social and economic considerations, as well as there are factors inherent within the strategies themselves that are going to be important considerations for broader acceptance and implementation in this setting. And so these are things that I hope we'll talk a little bit more about, such as the type of cure and the remission strategy, the ease of the deployment, the perceived risks and benefits, and the cost. And so while community and stakeholders and advocates in this setting have been more heavily involved in treatment and prevention from a research agenda, I don't believe that we've reached the same level of engagement yet for cure. We also heard a little bit about trust and do recognize that there is still some concern around trust and how industry can best partner. And perhaps in the cure space, this is even going to be a bit more challenging. And that is why we need robust community engagement, as we heard, early and often, so that we ensure that the interests and the issues of those in resource-limited settings are really at the forefront of our cure research agenda, and that we're effectively partnering to realize the cure goals.
Jeff?
Thanks, Alan. Is this on? Good. I work for a small biotech, but my background is a long time in HIV vaccine research, and then with two nonprofits that were without community engagement in sub-Saharan Africa and around the world would never have been successful, and that's the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation and then IAVI. And so I'm really trying to help bring that perspective to the biotech as we do trials in South Africa. We're doing a couple of COVID trials as we speak. We're setting up to do a cure research there as well. And with affiliated companies that are part of the family of companies that I belong to, we're also setting up manufacturing in both Botswana and South Africa, as well as training scientists and technicians to be able to help do the research and help with the manufacturing. So all of that combined is really going to hopefully allow us to engage broadly with the community as we move forward towards cure in a really stepwise way to achieve a cure sometime in the near future.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie, and thanks, Jeff. I think we can open it up to the audience now, and I would like to go to first to the left microphone to my left. Could you please identify yourself before you
Yes, Keith Crawford, Division of AIDS at the NIH in the United States. First of all, thanks to all of you for this very important discussion. I think coming from the first talk, Dr. Lewin pointed out some of the challenges in Africa, some of the biology differences in subtypes, for example. And some of the broadly neutralizing antibodies, I think most of them come from individuals who are infected with subtype B viruses. There's some evidence that some of these antibodies do not neutralize viruses from other subtypes, some of the subtypes that are common in sub-Saharan Africa. So what I'm wondering, when you're doing these studies in these populations, what is the process of somehow determining if the antibody you use may have efficacy in these individuals? Thank you.
Thank you. There's an excellent question. There's no one better than Marina Cascade to comment on that, and maybe Thumbi, you would also like to throw in your thoughts. Marina.
I don't know if I have the right answer. So first to what you said, some of the antibodies were identified in individuals with HIV from Africa. So they were infected with non-clade B viruses. But in terms of their use clinically, we have all learned how different classes of antibodies they have different coverages of different clades. And we are also learning as a field that a lot of the assays that were used to characterize these viruses in vitro may not be reflective of how they do clinically. So what do we do about that? And I think that, in my view, that's not a reason to stop developing and stop learning what the antibodies can and cannot do. I think in parallel to conducting trials in the best, safest way that we can, have to continue to think about assays that can teach us, can give us greater breadth of us understanding what's in the reservoir, what's archived, and what may be resistant. I don't think that to this day there is an assay that is excellent. There are some assays that may have better link to a clinical outcome if they're done on viruses that are in circulation, because those are most representative at that time. To try to understand what's archived in very deep reservoirs, it's a lot more challenging. And so there needs to be more development of assays and also better understanding of what combinations of antibodies may be better for different regions of the world.
Thank you, Marina. Sorry, Thumbi, but I think we need to go on for the sake of inclusion of others. And I see there are a couple of other questions in the room. Before we go to the room, we will cover it all, I promise you. I would like to actually go to the virtual panel. Zuzu, could you please give us some of your perspective? We heard from Sharon about the HCAP initiatives. Why do you think this is something which could, change the scene, and how you want to do that from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you for having me be part of this panel, and happy to participate. I think what's critical is that we need more African leadership, African voices to talk about HIV cure. So in as much as we've been talking about communities, I think it's important to recognize that communities are much broader than just people living with HIV. We have to think of the broader community in which we are all living in. So governments, civil society, churches, traditional leaders, academia, implementing partners, they're all part of that community in which we're trying to introduce a new innovation or intervention. We also have to remember that Africa is more than 54 countries, so a really diverse population. So engaging with one set of community doesn't mean that you've engaged with others. HCAP currently is in a period of transition, so we're really actively working with Africa CDC as well as WHO Africa office under the leadership of Dr. Moyeti to think through how to transition this platform that we put together the last 3 years and have more African involvement and engagement, and broadening up the platform to look beyond just HIV, because we recognize that there are other priority diseases on the African continent that have got significant impact. So for instance, trying to think through sickle cell disease, there's a lot of thousands or hundreds of thousands of children that have sickle cell disease and die every year, but there's no spotlight to them. So how do we use this platform that is looking at HIV cure to also integrate other diseases like sickle cell disease and bring in cure for sickle cell disease? So again, working with communities and defining communities a little bit more broadly than just people and their immediate families having the disease, but the whole infrastructure, including governments and other policymakers.
Thank you, Zuzu, for those elegant comments. To my right here, the next question.
Hi, Jennifer Adair, Fred Hutch, and the Global Gene Therapy Initiative. I think It's great to hear that small biotechs are pursuing local manufacturing. I think the best way to engage a community is to encourage economic development along these lines. And there's a number of small biotechs that are doing that. It does create educational pathways, job opportunities for local communities. So for the more established companies, how do you decide financially that it makes more sense to keep up the donor-recipient give-take relationship versus investing in the local community?
Excellent question. Devi, you want to comment on that? Where is she?
Oh, she's down.
Oh, she's there. I can certainly give my opinion later, but no, get started, please.
So I think, your question is kind of, how much do we invest locally versus follow the traditional model, I guess, of drug development. Yeah. So I think it has to. It's a sort of an equal. It's a problem that needs to be kind of seen from multiple viewpoints. And when it comes to cure, we're at early stages, but I think we're hearing, today we heard a lot about this yesterday as well, that all aspects of the research, and I think, Jeff, it's great to hear about the manufacturing, those things need to start moving into low and middle income settings now. So, I think from an established company's point of view, there's only motivation to support those efforts. There's really no downside to it, and we continue to find creative ways of doing that.
Yeah, thanks, Devi. If I may give you the perspective from my point of view, is that I think that the number one thing which we should do as industry is we should go and listen first, and then go into the particular low middle income settings and do more work in this particular regions with supporting local scientists. And I think what Thumbi has just explained to us about his FRESH cohort is just an excellent example how we are getting away from this donor-recipient relationship, but rather having a real partnership at the same level, so that we are engaging with researchers who are coming from the communities where where the most affected people are living actually. And this is something which we as companies should start increasingly doing, is that we are investing research and in research and supporting this research going on, and then we will continue and have to continue thinking about also manufacturing, of course, compounds, and bringing all the economic factors which are coming along with that also to the regions which are affected most. So these are just the two topics I think which we could do potentially immediately.
And Jan, may I comment here?
Yes, please.
On the question as well. So really quickly, we fully agree, right? So we recognize the barriers in funding and infrastructure and the things that we've been talking about, technology, education, et cetera. Some of the areas that we're investing a little bit more to enable certainly the research, and hopefully eventually we'll get there with bigger efforts around manufacturing, but really around funding. So to engage the researchers to enable that site. And we have investigator-initiated studies programs where investigators globally, so obviously including Africa, can develop and submit proposals. And these can be non-clinical or clinical funding or product support, and it's open to all the academic and community-based physicians and researchers worldwide. So if you're interested in conducting your own research, that is one mechanism. Through using education and engagement and alignment with stakeholders, we're trying to engage the scientific community by understanding the needs of what they need now and how we can make that happen through congresses where we're meeting, gathering, and discussing HIV agenda. We're building the ad boards similar to what Devi talked about, and we're visiting and expanding the sites, what Thumbi had alluded to. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on is that we're also trying to evolve what is being done in more high-income countries and reinvent and apply that in limited resource settings. And so one of the things that we're leading and collaborating with folks in academia is monitoring viral load through in-home blood collection and testing. And so we're kind of excited to initiate that effort and expand that to other countries, including Africa.
Great. On the left, next question.
Thank you. Thank you for the excellent talks today. My name is Karine. I'm from UNC. My comment is more a call to action of things we still need. We still need a good participatory practice addendum for HIV cure-related research. The current GPP was developed in the context of large-scale HIV prevention trials. What does it mean to involve communities around treatment interruptions, around partner protections and disclosure? I think we still need a GPP for cure research. We also need to really understand the needs of women in low and middle income countries, particularly young women. What has worked in older men in San Francisco may not work in Durban, South Africa. And third, I think we really need to invest in community and education materials that are locally appropriate. The work that Josephine has done to translate the complex science is really a model to follow, and I think we need real innovations in how we communicate about cure-related research in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Josephine, you want to comment on that, or?
Thank you so much. I think I'll say that in terms of the work that she commented on, when we look at information that is appropriate, we should also look at how to deliver the information. The work that I've done under series of JoJo is being delivered online because we know young people are online, but we also know that probably there are some that cannot access a smartphone. So are we in position to print and deliver materials at health facilities where these young people go on a daily basis to pick their medication? So as we look at designing and simplifying the information, we should also know where the young people are. Thank you.
Thank you. Question on the right here.
Hi, my name is Michael. I am with the DARE Collaboratories CAB. I'm also a community engagement manager for the sites in Seattle. And I just wanted to point out sort of like the emperor has no clothes here. We're talking about all of this work engaging communities in Africa around cure, and we don't even have GPP for treatment yet that really has been successfully shared with us. We saw an example of a global community advisory board that had one person from Africa, and that's not a country, that's a continent. And we had one other person that was from a low or middle income country, and yet we're talking about doing all these things, and yet we're not even doing it where we are yet. And I just wanted to say the emperor has no clothes. We're talking in a foolish way, and we're not committing our money and our mouths to what we are really saying. We're not doing the work that we really need to do. We need to switch it. And so it's just a comment that I felt that I needed to say, because it just felt like after all of this stuff talking, we're going to leave here and there's not going to be a lot more that's going to change. And I'm going to come back to 2023, 2024, 2025 and not see much action taken to make this actually happen. And I hope I'm wrong with that, but it just feels like we're just going to keep on talking these talks and not walking the walk the way we need to with money. So I just wanted to share that.
No, thank you for your insights, but maybe you can stay on the mic for a moment, because I wanted to, I'd like to ask you for a concrete action which you would like to see from us doing.
I would love to see a global community advisory board that represents where most of the HIV comes from. So let's have there's even a CAB that already exists. There was the Afro CAB that existed that could have been sort of funded in a way that you wouldn't have to redo the work, and that had representatives from all over the world. So that would be one way to get the African continent well represented in terms of community advisement. You had skilled people who were already a part of that, instead of just picking Moses, as we all seem to pick, as our representative of not just Uganda, but of all of Africa. We had other people that we could have used. So that's one example that I would say where you would have that. Instead of trying to create a new global community advisory board, find the ones that already exist and develop those. How about using the ACTG's GCAB as well? And they have an Afrocentric element to that. And we could be funding that and having the ways that we use the community advisement just broaden, and instead of trying to recreate the wheel and get the funding for that.
Tombe, would you like to comment? Or?
I mean, I don't know whether I should comment specifically about. I do agree with Michael here, but I do think, as Jan said at the beginning, I think we have to see this as a start of a dialogue. This is the way I see it: is that I think this initiative is a very important one, and I think the potential is great. But clearly, we are at the beginning of this dialogue between what industry can do. I do think there is much more than can be done. As I alluded, I think that there needs, and a lot of other people have mentioned about the need for much bigger investment. So, but I do think that the fact that we are starting with this kind of dialogue gives us an opportunity, and I think you raised some very good points. I think Jennifer raised some very good points around manufacturing down the line. I think all these are really well taken points, but I think that this is just the beginning of this dialogue, and hopefully this becomes a much bigger movement. So I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, and I hope it grows as well. That's why I was speaking.
No,
absolutely.
we are actually in a dialogue, which is great. So Sharon,
Sharon, this is a dialogue. This is the way to go.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael. Great point. I don't want people to walk away from the room thinking that nothing is out there except for Josephine. So Josephine is actually a graduate of an IAS-run advocacy academy, which we've run now, I think, 4 times. And at every one of these academies, they're 3-day in-person, or they used to be in person, they will be again in person, initiatives to educate community around HIV cure and increase literacy. And from those academies, we have really grown a number of fantastic people, but it's only the beginning. And so if you count them up, there's probably about 120 that have attended, and we'll go back to in person. I should add that those academies need funding, both the research academies and the Cure Academy and the advocacy academies. Industry has partly funded them, but we need more to do it more, and that's really the pool of people that we can engage. So I think it is the beginning of a dialogue. I do think we should commend companies for looking out for, getting global community advisory boards, and then organisations like IAS, etc., need to do the training. This is, Michael's like the best in the world of training community, but it's a hard slog, isn't it? And we need to, provide all that training for people as well.
So I must say that your example of the IAS's efforts really is making a difference. I see new community members becoming advocates for cure because of those academies. And so AVAC and IAS working together to create those, I think it's really a beautiful thing, because I see the results of that. And that would be great to see those conform into, or somehow become a global force, whether it's a community advisory board or something else. But I really do agree that what you guys have done has really done more for that one thing than anything else that I've seen. And it's really great.
Thank you very much. I think Debbie and Bonnie and we have received the message. So thank you very much for that. Now, let me please, Tim Henrich, who is patiently waiting, on the line. Tim, do you have any thoughts to add to this discussion, please?
Yeah, this is an excellent discussion, I think, especially where our working group can go forward to help facilitate these types of issues. I was struck, again, as we inch forward towards establishing strategies that can actually cure HIV or lead to long-term remission. Again, we see stem cell and gene therapy at the meeting, we see immunotherapies that have been rolled out, and this is where we're going. And this is really where we lack the infrastructure inequity across the globe in terms of having infrastructure to do these types of studies, to do these types of procedures and techniques, and to rapidly expand. So it's not just moving the research into areas where people need it the most, but it's really establishing that infrastructure, the financial, experimental infrastructure that's really needed. And I think that's really a key point, I think, that folks have been bringing home, and hopefully that we can facilitate through these discussions and also through the IAS to make this happen in reality, because that's what we really need.
Great, absolutely. Let's go to the left and next question.
Hi, so I'm Jessica Salzwedel. I'm from AVAC, and I run our CURE program. And so just a quick point that through the Martin Delaney Collaboratories, we've been able to establish some of these infrastructures, like through the CURE ROAR program, as well as the IAS AVAC Academy. And we see that having these solid programs really helps create a pipeline, not just of advocates, but community engaged in the research. And that's been done on the prevention side, really through the networks, and it's allowed for transparency on how to get involved. And while we're establishing it through the collaboratory program, I'm wondering how industry can set up that similar parallel of transparency on how advocates and community can get involved in the infrastructures that you've mentioned here today.
That's a great advice. I can't give you an immediate response, but I would really love to, I think I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues from other companies to get engaged with that and to learn from your, exercise.
Great, thank you.
I think this would be great from the AVAC and other perspectives with the committee, the industry collaboratory that we would, as Jan and I move to more an advisory role, we'll be turning on at the end of this to both Tim and Bonnie, and I'm sure they will take up the banner and the opportunity to work with you and other organizations represented here to really move this forward in the community and where the industry aspect can come. Next question. Is there on the left? Yeah.
Thank you. I like the discussion, the talk about cure, mainly sub-Saharan Africa, where we come from. Yes, industries. Which industries are we talking about that must sponsor these things? It's industries from here. It's very important that I liked what he said and what he said, that when problems come, normally if you empower people with problems, they will be able to solve those problems much better. What is it that you did here that cannot be done in sub-Saharan Africa? You have strong industries. Yes, it's very good to say we'll donate, we'll do that, so that we find a treatment. Yes, treatment can come from here down to Southern Africa. It's very good, but treatment can come from Southern Africa down there if they are empowered. HIV people can work as much as HIV negative people, even if they're in Southern Africa. Let's empower them. Let's empower their industries. Let's create industries. He said, HIV people who are empowered go back to school, go back to work. It's very important. Yes, it's very good to try and solve Southern African problems from here. It's very clever, but it's wiser to do it the other way around. Let's strengthen their industries. What did you do here that we cannot do down south? Let's support the industries. We are really not begging to say, continue feeding us with money. Give us ways of making our industries strong. We will be able to work with the globe together with you. This is not the last disease. Africa is the largest continent on earth. And this is not going to be the last big disease. Look, we had COVID. When COVID started, everyone predicted there will be graves all over, mounds of graves in Africa. It was the opposite. So we have the chance and potential to do it for ourselves. If we are supported, if our industries are empowered. We have scientists. Most of our scientists are doing work here because we don't have strong industries to employ them. It's not that we don't have brains. We have brains, but the system is such that people think money should always flow that way. It's wrong. We should strengthen the source of the problem. What did you do here that HIV was much lower or is much lower? Why do you think treatment must originate from here and then go down south, not the other way around? We are all able to do these things, and I think we need to change and re-switch our thinking, and as people will work together. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think there is no better way to conclude this session with such a pledge for action here. Before we conclude, I would like to really thank all the participants, all the panelists, but especially those of you who have attended virtually and those of you who have been, taking your journey to Montreal here. I think it was a very good start. I would also like to acknowledge the contribution of the very many folks at IAS who have been really working hard on this symposium, and especially Nelly and Roger. I would like to thank you. Great job. And I would like to turn it over to Alan for the last words here.
Well, the last words are passing the baton. As Jan and I are moving from our position of chairs to Tim Henrich and Bonnie Howe at Merck and UCSF, we really look forward to your leadership, and I think this has really started us in the really right direction as we look forward to the next meeting in Brisbane next year, and I think great opportunities to build on these new ideas and how industry and community can work. And we just heard this elegant discussion of moving that into the African continent, and Zuzu as well from the HCAP program. So I can see the three of you on our screen, I think, as a partnership of moving this whole entity into the African community will be phenomenal over the next year. Thank you, and thank you everybody from the audience.